Welcome to Sacred Exploration with Lisa Tremont Oda. Are you making the most of your experience as a spiritual being in physical form? Do you want to live with greater levels of peace and integrity? Today, Lisa and her guests will help you discover, uncover, and recover what's missing in yourself. Now, here's your host, Lisa Tremont Oda.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Exploration. I'm your host, Lisa Tremont Oda. And today we're going to be speaking about homeschooling, one of my very favorite topics. I have so many, but this is yet another. And I find it really interesting that homeschooling can be such a sacred exploration. And one of the main reasons I feel that way is because it really takes a conscious decision and awareness that there's even an option to homeschool. Which I don't think a lot of people realize, and then to own your power and to really take advantage of the opportunity to do so if it feels right for you. My guest today, Tamara Effron, who I will introduce shortly. She's one of my dearest friends, and we grew up together in high school together, in the church together, and basically, she started homeschooling before I did. And so she planted the seed for me to even be aware that there was such a possibility. And I remember when my first child, Eric, was about 5 years old and slated for high school. I mean, it's high school. Let me jump the gun there a bit. Slated for kindergarten. And the big thing at that time was whether or not you got AM kindergarten or PM kindergarten, morning or afternoon. And most of us wanted morning kindergarten, which meant that we needed to line up, like going to a concert. You know, you get your seat in line, first come, first serve. And I remember sitting there next to a woman, and I started talking about homeschooling a lot in line for this public school kindergarten experience. And, it just felt to me like the decision to enter kindergarten in the public school system was such an unconscious act. Like, it was just something that you do. Your kid turns 5, you go to kindergarten, you don't really think too much about it. You just go through the motions. But because of my friend Tamara, I was aware of the fact that we do have options. We do have choice in regard to how we school our kids. And so even though I did sign him up for morning kindergarten, he did attend, and in fact attended public school through the second grade. I began homeschooling him when he was in third grade, which is another cosmic universal twist, because before becoming a nutritionist, I had wanted to be a third grade teacher. And lo and behold, it turns out that the first year I homeschool is when my son is in third grade. So that was kind of cosmic. So in any case, homeschooling has truly been just one of the best, hands down, no doubt about it, decisions of my life. Like, I am so grateful for that opportunity that I had with my children. And I believe that they're grateful for the opportunity that they had as well. So I am just indebted to my friend Tamara for her vision that she had before I had, and for her sharing it with me, so that I too could have that experience. And today I want to open up the exploration with all of you, our listeners, so that if you still have the opportunity to homeschool your kids, or if your kids are already in public or private school and you're thinking that there might be a different route that might be better for them, or if you know somebody else who could benefit, this program's for you. So with that, I would like to introduce my dear friend Tamara. Tamara's path was to be an actress, similar to how mine was to be a teacher and then took a different angle. Hers was to be an actress, but along the way, she found an AIDS hospice through her Science of Mind minister. She was the bereavement counselor there, assistant director, and then went on to be the temporary director of a 21-bed hospice in South Central LA. Not an easy task. And along the way, she founded Tanya's Children, a nonprofit agency to help children who were orphaned by the AIDS epidemic. After having her own children, she went on to become a La Leche League leader and a quality parent instructor. And the rite of motherhood was a great one for her, guided by a strong tribe of families in the homeschooling movement. And after homeschooling her kids, it was time to help them get into college because, yes, it is true that homeschooled kids do go to college. That is an option. So with that, Tamara, welcome to Sacred Exploration.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, it's so exciting. And thank you, Tam, for all your support of Sacred Exploration. You're just so wonderful about sharing and your enthusiasm and participating in our conversations. I can't thank you enough.
Well, it's one of my favorite shows, and I'm really falling in love with the whole empowerment radio station. There's a couple other shows I'm really into. So you've also introduced me to a whole new world that I didn't know about.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So, I've explained just a little droplet about my entry into homeschooling. Of course, this is such a favorite topic. We could go on for weeks and years, but you're going to begin by sharing with us how you came to even know that there was a homeschooling option and how you made that decision for yourself and your children.
Sure. I was actually with a group of women in a park, and we were just learning how to breastfeed. And I knew I wanted to breastfeed. I wanted to give myself, my kids, a really healthy start. So we were just sitting around a park in Tarzana, and as the children were getting older, the older children were still around us. And it was so lovely. People were bringing picnic lunches, and we were holding our babies, and the little children were playing around us. And it was unique, and I didn't, quite wonder why there were so many older children around us. But then I started to realize that all of these families were homeschooling. So the older ones would come up and take the baby, or a middle one would come up and play with another sibling. And there was like a virtual park school going around right in front of my eyes. And everything from the children knew what medicine to grab out of the homeopathy bag if somebody other's, child fell in their family. And I just saw such independence and family life. And I felt like I was on a farm in the middle of Los Angeles. And I was so inspired by it. So my girlfriends and I started talking about what we were going to do with our 4-year-olds at the time. They were all boys, and they were very active. And one of my friends had a 5-year-old, and he just wasn't fitting in. They wanted him to sit down and be quiet. And they basically wanted to kick him out of kindergarten if he didn't behave. And so we started just meeting once a week and playing games and getting to know one another. And that grew into about 10 families. And then we found another 10 families in another area in LA, and another 10 families, to the point where we were 50 families strong,
Wow.
Sitting at a park right by my house and doing everything from Shakespeare plays to sign language to musical instruments to studying heroes in our country. And basically I was learning how to cook because all these women were bringing all these beautiful salads and healthy food.
So it wasn't just homeschooling for the kids, it was for you as well. And we all learn along the way.
So it was a community. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of different ways to get into it. And I can share the specific way that we went, which was different than many of my friends and a little different than what you did too. I think it's important to know that there's a lot of options. Right.
So what do you mean about the way that you entered?
Well, because we were a little bit more nervous, I guess. We wanted to make sure there was structure. We actually homeschooled through an independent study program through our local school.
I see.
So you go and you fill out an independent study form, and they give you all the books. And the only requirement is that you meet with one of their teachers every 3 weeks. And for my husband at the time, that was very important. Many of the people that I was homeschooling with were doing unschooling, which we can talk a little bit about. But he felt that there was a check-in that made him feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. So every 3 weeks we'd meet with the teacher, and we would just show one sample of each subject. And we were following the state curriculum to a point. I did science once a month and social studies once a month. I'm not sure how much they do it in actual public school. But we did an hour of school every day, including Sundays and including summer. And that was it. And so that's the path we took. And that just basically gives you curriculum for free. And it also gives you an opportunity to take the tests to see where your kids are, if you're into that. My kids liked it. They had fun. They never thought it was anything. And then there's the different ways that we can talk about the way that you did it and the way other unschooling families do it.
Right. Well, I guess I entered kind of with the same sort of fears where I didn't know, I felt a little overwhelmed by the whole thing, being new to it and not knowing really how to do it. And I had already set myself up with 2 other major projects that I was committed to seeing through. And so I really wanted it to be kind of handed to me as in an easiest way as possible. So we ended up registering with the California Virtual Academy, CAVA, which is basically like a public school, but it's online. And similarly, you meet with a coordinator. It may have changed now, just for the record. I mean, it's been some years. I'm sure they've updated some things, but we would meet with a teacher, coordinator once every, I can't remember if it was once every month or 3 months, but we did do that routinely. And then there would be coordinated events that we could attend, and the kids could take the STAR test and do all that stuff as well if we wanted. But most of the class material was given through the internet and as well as tangible material. So you could do it either way. You could do it through online, or you could also do it using the hardcover books and such. But most of the testing was online. But it was good for me because it did really hand to me all the curriculum that I would need to get them going. And then we could adjust to what life was like in general with homeschooling, and also participating in online groups, like homeschooling groups in our area, where we would have chess clubs and cooking clubs and Lego building clubs and all that kind of fun stuff, and coordinated park days and retreats. And it was just so much fun. And but I do remember that I felt a little bit overwhelmed by it, because even though it was independent, it was still part of the public school curriculum. And it was just like, I couldn't do any of the optional things. Like, option on top of what was already required was a lot.
Right.
And so what happened for me over time, I think we did that for 2 years. And then over time, my desire for freedom and flexibility just continued to grow, and, basically hasn't stopped. And so I wanted more freedom. And so then we ended up finding another group, still a group that we could connect with, but we got to pick more of our curriculum and design it. And it was just, there was more flexibility with it and not quite the same pressure. But, just to kind of encapsulate things for the listeners. So for myself, I ended up homeschooling. I have 2 boys, and they were 2 school years apart. And so I ended up teaching my oldest when he entered 3rd grade, and my youngest entering 1st grade. And some of the subjects I could teach in the middle, like history, I would teach to both of them at the same time, and science even. The math, they were at different levels, reading, was different, and things like that. But we ended up homeschooling for 6 years. And then my eldest entered high school in a private school setting, and then my youngest entered the private school setting at 7th grade. And now my oldest is at UC Santa Cruz, and my youngest is at USC. So, it's a journey that I think you're going to speak to as well, that you can do this for part of your child's educational experience or all of it. You can do some of it as you did, leave it, and then come back to it again as needed.
Exactly.
So how your overall story, if you want to share?
Well, I just also before that wanted to say that what you did was a really good thing that I was telling parents, that I try to tell parents when they're struggling with their kids, like right at the moment, what do I do? My kid's getting D's in high school and completely unmotivated, doesn't know what their passion is, and doesn't have any passion to study. You can hop on to something like what Lisa did with Kava, and there's several different companies now that do that. And you can just do online at school, which takes a little bit of the pressure off, because you don't actually have to be physically teaching a high schooler necessarily. It's more like an online college class. which we can also talk about that because we'll talk about it later, but there is no need for high school in homeschooling. You can go straight to community college, start online classes if you live in a rural area once you're 12. And in California, you can start your AA when you're 13. So you can just skip right over all of the high school drama if you like, or do we have time to talk about my story before break, or there's...
No, well, we're not having a break exactly today, so we'll just go with our flow. I just, it's so interesting. This is why homeschooling, I just want to impress upon everyone that it's such a sacred exploration because it's unique to every child and family, the way that you do it. Like you're saying, yeah, some people, they can skip out on the high school drama and go into college. And like for us, part of the reason that we went back into the system is because we didn't want to feel like we missed out on that high school experience, even with all the drama. So, we just didn't want to get to the end point. And I was also kind of reaching my limits and boundaries on what I could teach, even though I want to make it clear to our listeners that so much of homeschooling is not the parent actually doing the teaching. You can teach as much as you want, but a lot of times it's coordinating, like you'll bring your child to a Spanish teacher or to a science teacher. So you don't have to take because I hear so many parents say, oh, I could never teach my kid this or that. And it's like, well, you don't have to, so just making that clear. So go ahead. Yes. Finish your...
Well, actually what you said made me think of something that a lot of that happens with my clients is I can remember when I believe it was Eric, was telling you what his needs were. And I really listen for the voice of the child when I'm talking to my clients, because I remember when I was friends with you, you were talking to me about what Eric was saying. And I was saying, it sounds like Eric's soul knows what he wants to do. And, my kids didn't have that because basically I fell in love with being a mom. And at 4 years old, I didn't want to send him off. So I saw this beautiful community and just started schooling him. They didn't know schooling or unschooling. They just were homeschooled. But Leland did it until 5th grade, and then he entered middle school in 6th grade, which works for some. I don't know. I think middle school is a pretty frightening place, but that's where Leland entered in a little small charter school, and socially and academically worked for him. He got excellent grades, and he had a pretty strong middle school faculty. My daughter Lexi went in 4th grade, and her experience was terrible in 4th and 5th grade. They basically had her tied to the desk. She couldn't even get up to get a tissue. All testing, all worksheets, nothing. She hated it. She cried all the time. But when she got into high school, so she stayed in school after 4th grade. So she was homeschooled for 4 years and schooled for 8 years, where my son was homeschooled for 8 years and schooled for 4 years. She didn't love high school at the beginning, but she will share that it was an awesome experience and she's glad she went through it, which I'm sure
it's great to even have that perspective. Well. It's great that she,
in fact, I was somewhere where somebody was really struggling with high school with their kids. And I was being a little snarky and saying, there's just no reason for that. Children being under the watch of adults after they're 16, sitting in rooms all day, and my daughter was like, but actually I had a very healthy, very interesting high school experience. And, looking back, she's glad she did it. She met some of her best friends that she's been friends with till now. And Lisa and I met, in high school. So, there, one thing I learned from a La Leche League conference, a speaker one time, is every single decision you make, there's a moral and there's a lesson to be learned in every single decision you make, whether you school, you unschool. We're not saying there's a right and wrong. We just really want people to know that there's possibility and that there's options.
Right. And there are just so many reasons to homeschool. Like you mentioned, sometimes kids might be suffering socially in school or academically. for me, I mean, it was also somewhat of a selfish reason because I felt like, oh my gosh, here my kids are only in first grade and they have homework at night. And my parents, their grandparents who were able to spend lots and lots of time with them in their earliest years, suddenly weren't seeing the kids as much. And it's not that my parents didn't have the time, it's that the kids didn't have the time between school and their after school activities and such. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, do I really want to use these next 10 years of their life to not be in the presence of their grandparents who maybe after 10 years may not even be in the kind of health to spend time with them? And so that was kind of my initial reason, but I'm Virgo mind and then Virgo sun and Libra rising. So I'm very analytical and I like to weigh out the pros and the cons and look at things from all angles. And I got to tell you, I did that with the homeschooling and there were a lot of reasons to do it. And I got my husband to back me up on that at the time. But almost as soon as he made his decision, he backed out. It kind of freaked him out. And it was mostly the social issue that freaked him out. And I decided, well, I still love homeschooling. I'm still going to read about it. I'm passionate about it. I stayed in touch and paid attention to what the kids were going through during the school year. And I saw that, like, for example, in kindergarten, the teacher was reading a story, and towards the end of the morning, before they go home, they all sit on their color rows, and the teacher, one of the kids said, "Oh, Mrs. So-and-so, you never finished that story." And she said, "Oh, you're right." So she goes to get the book, and while she's reading the book, the kids on the yellow line go get their lunch boxes and then come back. And then the kids on the red line go and get their lunch boxes and come back. And then I'm sitting there and I thought, oh my gosh, like, not one kid really got to hear the whole entirety of this story, which is being picked up like a week later from when it began. And, that's just one example of just things that are not in our children's best interest. And that social thing, I remember sometimes I would freak out, and like after homeschooling for 2 years, like, oh my God, are my kids missing out on the recess experience and the playground experience? And I would call you up and say, Tam, help me out. And I remember you saying, like, oh my gosh, like, and all these mothers whose kids were public schooled would be saying, you know what, your kid isn't missing out on anything. When the kids go out for recess, by the time they finish their lunch and get out there and figure out what the heck they want to do, the bell rings and it's time for them to come back in. Whereas we could go off to a park and it could take the kids half an hour to figure out what they want to do. And if they wanted to play for another 2 hours or 3 hours, we could do it. They could do it. So there are just, there could be like 100 reasons to do it. And
that's so beautiful. And that actually reminds me of this book that I wanted to share with the audience by John Gatto, Gatto. Is this a good time I can share that?
No, please.
Okay. His book is called Dumbing Us Down. And he was asked at a conference that I saw him at, what big ideas are important to children? And, basically he was saying that, well, what he thinks is important to children is that their learning isn't peculiar and idiosyncratic. When he was a teacher, and I can read you his bio at some point if we have time, it's interesting, but he said when he's a teacher, he's teaching out of context, teaching too much material, nothing's related, everything's disconnected, confusing, incoherent. There's age segregation that doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet, and standardized tests, obviously. And if you take a closer look at school curriculum, there's a constant violation of order and nature, and natural order. So what happens is kind of what happened to Lisa is that, and I didn't think about this until recently, that we end up in a school system because everybody else is doing it. It's actually legal. I mean, there is a truancy issue if you don't homeschool or go to school. You can't just be out there on the streets,
it's
at
illegal.
5, hanging with your Marlboros or whatever. But so we get in there and we as parents, we don't quite figure out how unnatural it is for a while. It takes a while for us to kind of figure it out. And there's people that have their kids in school now that know it's not right. but they don't know how to do it differently. They're like, they're a little bit overwhelmed. I work with people now with my new business, Dakota Academy, where I'm trying to help people find ways to homeschool and work, because, some people can't stay home.
Right.
But a lot of it is just this story that we've been told. In the book, Dumbing Us Down, and some other books that he writes, he shares about how our school system in America was basically set up similar to Germany. And the reason they needed school systems in Germany is everybody had to go to work during the war. And what happened was the German school system was set up on these time periods, of half hour to 40-minute time periods with bells and whistles. And that's the other thing that drove me crazy when my kids went back to school, was they could never really finish anything. They were constantly interrupted. And that's one thing we don't have in homeschooling. We can actually do one subject an entire day and kids can fall in love with it. And I can remember my kids being into magnets for like a month. All different things. Lisa, I'm sure, has a million stories with her kids.
Tam,
humor and yeah.
We are going to take a commercial break.
Okay.
So everyone stay with us. This is really just such great conversation about homeschooling. I'm here with my guest, Tamara Effron. I'm Lisa Tremont Ota, your host on Sacred Exploration. We'll be right back.
Find out what makes the most successful people tick. Keep listening to the Voice America Empowerment Channel. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
Do you remember your dreams? Not exploring your dream life is like receiving a gift but not opening it. Join Lisa Tremont Ota and Lisa Ferrer this April for an interactive workshop series that will help make your goals and dreams become results in your business and personal life. To register or to find out more, call 925-497-2529 or email sacredexploration@gmail.com. Space is limited in this highly interactive workshop series, so call today and learn how you can make your dreams come true. That's 925-497-2529 or email sacredexploration@gmail.com. We have relationships with people in our lives, but arguably our relationship with food is the most intimate, dynamic, and enduring of them all. You can nourish your relationship with food and the planet. Purchase your copy of The Sacred Art of Eating, Healing Our Relationship with Food, written by Lisa Tremont Ota. A registered dietitian, nutritionist, and shamanic soul coach, Lisa can help you heal your relationship with food. The Sacred Art of Eating is available on Amazon.com, sacredexploration.com, and imperfectlyvegan.com.
Become a member of VoiceAmerica.com. It's easy, and best of all, it's free. Start out by going to our homepage or any of our channels and click register at the top. Once you've created an account and signed in, you can create your own custom library, opt into our newsletter, search by show, host, guest, or topic of interest, or browse millions of hours of content across all of our Voice America radio channels. Membership gets you more. Visit VoiceAmerica.com today to get started and tailor the listening experience to your taste.
Find out what makes the most successful people tick. Keep listening to the Voice America Empowerment Channel. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to Sacred Exploration. To reach Lisa or her guest today, please call into 1-888-346-9141. That's 1-888-346-9141. You may also send an email to sacredexploration@gmail.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Sacred Exploration. I'm your host, Lisa Tremont Ota, and I'm here today speaking with my guest, Tamara Effron, about homeschooling, a topic that we're both passionate about because we both homeschooled our children in different ways and for different periods of time. But, I'll also say that one of the great things about homeschooling is that we got to spend more time together as moms and friends and with our kids than we would have if we were not homeschooling. I mean, I would go down to LA and we would spend time in the museums and and she would come up to Northern California, and we would spend time at the lumber yard or whatever, the adventure playground in Berkeley, where the kids would use hammers and nails and all kinds of things to build structures. And because of that experience, our kids, because again, we're like, besties from high school. And it's so wonderful that our kids, because of that experience especially, were able to get to know each other and are still very close to this day. It just was so formative in terms of building relationship.
It is really a beautiful thing, and all of the homeschoolers talk about it. I have, at any one point during spring break, there were at least 4 or 5 children here, sometimes 12 or 13. And some of them are from a youth group, a Jewish youth group that my kids are a part of, a leadership group. But many of them are homeschoolers, and they've known them since they were 4 or 5 years old. Lexi's best friend, who she knows through a youth group, is been dating Leland's best friend, who he's known since, I've known Tal's mother since he was 2. And, these friendships are just beautiful. We've been at their bar mitzvahs, at their Hanukkah parties for years. And each family in homeschooling talks about that. Some of our friends have never went to public school. They've homeschooled all the way through college and are in college now or graduated from college. But these friendships are so deep and supportive, and a lot of things that you don't see in public schools. I worked in private schools for 7 years, and I got to see a little bit of it. The whole 7th grade, internet app thing going down, with 7th grade girls is happening even in sweet private Jewish schools. It's something that happens. But the kids in homeschooling, I was at a wedding a couple of years ago of a friend of mine, and there were 30 homeschooled kids there. And my friend had taught them all sign language, and they all got up and signed a John Mayer song, a beautiful song about how we're going to change the world for her. And they're laughing. And I mean, these bonds are just so deep because you have time.
Right.
And I think that's why it's a little overwhelming for people to think about homeschooling, is because they're not used to having that much time with their kids. So you do have to do a lot of self-work, because you don't get to drop them off at 8 a.m, pick them up at 2 o'clock, or if they go to aftercare, you pick them up at 5 o'clock. Most of our friends who are in school, we don't see at all, even on the weekends, especially once they get into middle school and high school. Nobody sees one another anymore, because even if the parents have time to connect, I have dear friends whose kids have 5 tests in 1 week in high school, or 2 projects. I had times when my kids in 7th grade had 2 giant projects, and we weren't able to see their grandparents when they were in school. We weren't able to. But when they were homeschooling, we just pack up the car, go up to see my dad in Clear Lake, hang out on the lake, learn about algae in the lake, learn about my father's life, which was incredible. He was an entrepreneur, and he was a president of savings and loans, and he would tell us all kinds of stories about the financial institutions of America. And even my mom, she worked in corporate America and ran hotels, and always had really interesting stories, to tell the children. And those are memories, that you hope other children have, but it's just time. You get so much of your time back, like you were saying.
Well, yeah. Well, one of the interesting things for us was that when we started homeschooling, just like a month later, we found out that their grandfather was dying of cancer, pancreatic cancer. And we were able to go over and spend a lot of time with him. We would go out to the park and go kite flying and looking at Crab Cove at the crabs and ocean life. And he passed probably about 3 months into homeschooling. But I thought to myself, wow, if the kids were in school, they might have seen him like one more time before he passed. But this way, they actually got to be a part of his dying process. And it was a very gentle process. And it was such a much more natural experience. And when you think about it in the big picture of life, especially since they were only in first and third grade at the times, I mean, how much more value they got. Right. Being able to have that sort of flexibility. And another example is my husband then also, he didn't want to take vacations when there was like long lines, like if you were going to go to Disneyland or something and all, everyone goes at the same time because all the kids are on break. And I said, well, look, I mean, if we're going to take a vacation, we have to go when the kids are out of school. And it just didn't really work for him that well. So when we ended up homeschooling, it was perfect for him. We could go whenever we wanted, even according to his schedule, when there were no lines, and just, enjoy that. I always hope that I could be maybe the homeschooler that took my kids off to Europe for 3 months or something like that, but that didn't happen. And
well, you did take them off to Europe at some point.
Yeah, that's true. Not quite for an extended, but it is true that when we did take our trips, we would bring the homeschooling with us. And I love doing that. And I think they were okay with it too, a bit. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier, and you had mentioned, kind of more this intuitive vibe that yes, there's a lot of logical reasons to homeschool, but there's also just this deep intuitive feeling that there's more for our kids than sending them off and sitting with the same kids basically throughout their life, because they're in the same classroom with kids, but they travel with that same age kid throughout their entire academic experience, even through college. Whereas in homeschool, they're learning alongside kids who are younger and kids who are older, and they're out talking to adults more and all of that stuff. But also from the standpoint of the dumbing down, that's what it was that we were speaking to. It's really true that in the schools, they're teaching to the test, and the kids who maybe are at a faster pace are kind of held back a little bit. I mean, there's some efforts that the schools make to kind of meet that kid where they're at, but they're not really sufficient.
There's no real way to meet that effort. I've worked in schools that are incredible, and you can definitely give them some challenging work, but I'm not saying all the schools, because a lot of schools are changing now, but if you have a kid who can't sit still and needs to be not in a four-wall situation and not in a desk situation, needs to be in a Google type of a classroom, or just needs to be in nature. Some children just need to be learning outdoors. Mm-hmm. Some children need to be inspired by older children. And the schools do try some of this stuff.
They try.
But it's a lot easier to do in homeschooling,
Well, and then the other thing is not just the dumbing down, but, supporting the whole child and really exploring their interests. Like back in tribal times when they didn't go to schools, the leaders, the elders would notice what skills and what interests a child had, and then they would nurture it. Like, oh, this child's really into nature and the flowers, and maybe they become a gardener, or, whatever it is their passion, you would nurture it. And it just feels like that's so much more available to us as parents through a homeschool situation. Now, I did expose my kids to a lot of different things, and I can't say that they became like an expert athlete or an expert musician or anything like that. And sometimes it perplexes me a little bit, like to have done the homeschool broad view. But both of my kids are big thinkers. I just think that their perspective on life is so broad, and that they're able to even recognize, like your daughter Lexi, like when they're in an institution, like it was a good experience. High school, it was an experience. It's not like it didn't define their life. And but just to have this broader perspective in general.
Yeah, and it's almost like imagining, the production of a Thanksgiving feast. Each action is in sequence and in harmony with one another. You're doing it as a community. You're doing it as a family. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's not a lot of that in schools. There's not a lot of beginning, middle, and end. It's more rare. And for me, one of my biggest reasons I homeschooled, which is so funny to me because it took me so long to learn about nutrition. It took me till I was well in my 30s, was I wanted to teach my children about healthy food. And I thought, if I send them off to school with that little lunchbox, what the heck am I going to put in there? They're not going to eat apples and carrots all day. And I found myself basically on the road in homeschooling or in my kitchen. I was we cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, my children. And I wasn't somebody as a child who spent time in the kitchen. My parents both worked. I was a latchkey kid. I was a Swanson's dinner kid. I just love the idea of cooking with my kids. And that was a whole nother world that I wouldn't have gotten if they were in school.
Look, we do have more time, but just to be sure we get it in, why don't you tell us a little bit about Dakota Academy and what you're doing there?
Okay. So Dakota Academy started from my helping other people figure out how to homeschool. And I'd love to offer anybody who's listening to call me a complimentary session. I can work with you to figure out where you are. Some clients just need a little support to make school work for them. I have one client whose son is in freshman but getting D's, and I said, there's no reason to be in a high school getting D's. You can't do anything with that. You can't even get a community if you want to go to college, There's no reason to stay in school anymore if it's not inspiring to you. Sometimes they just need a little help getting inspired. Sometimes they need help transitioning out of school. I have a first grader who is from Israel who needs to move into second grade, but they're trying to hold her back. But developmentally, she's quite mature. There's all kinds of ways that homeschooling can help you get you where you need to go. So that's why I opened Dakota Academy. And also I have Dakota Academy for my own children when they were homeschooling, as well as helping kids if they don't want to do high school and they do want to do college. We have college for free in California for 2 years, 3 years. So if you want to have a free college AA, I can help you with that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And then, so people can find you on Facebook?
Yeah,
is that the best way?
On Facebook, on Dakota Academy, Instagram under Quality Parent. And then my email, if you want to email me and I can give you a free session, is qualityparenting@gmail.com.
Thank you. Thank you for offering our listeners that. That's awesome, Tam.
Absolutely.
Well, I know I've benefited.
I didn't want to take you away from your intuitive, but just for me, the intuitive part was the food, which basically I went from, being, we basically were vegetarian, and I just wanted to make sure that we talked about that as well.
Yeah, well, that's great. I might be getting my son out here for a quick moment. We'll see if we have time. But, I just, for the listeners too, a lot of women would say like, oh, I could never homeschool. My kid comes home and he's just, complains about his homework and we just butt heads and there's just no way. And then I say, well, if you were homeschooling, your kid wouldn't have homework like that. And the other thing is when a child comes home and they're trying to understand a math problem and you're trying to help them, you're not necessarily teaching them the way that they're learning in class. So there's a conflict. Like, that's not the way the teacher explained it. And they get all frustrated, understandably. But if you're there and you're part of the process, or if they have a regular teacher that's handling that through your homeschooling, that kind of problem is gone. Now, it's not for everyone, clearly. It's not for everyone, but I feel that it's available to a lot more parents than they're giving themselves credit for.
Yeah, and what you were saying before about, your child is basically in this building all day, with sometimes the most amazing teacher. I mean, Virginia Masante was my drama teacher in Bowditch and changed my life. I mean, the support that I got from her, I became an actress for many years. I pursued my dreams. I'm not saying that all teachers are bad, but what happens if your little one is in a classroom where that teacher doesn't get him or her, doesn't have an affinity for him or her? Think about my daughter who was in a calculus class of 42 kids. And the teacher straight up told us at parent-teacher conference, I can't teach your kids. It's impossible. They have to come in over breaks. So there's so much, what happened to me when I worked in the schools for 7 years is that there's so much happening in schools that is under the adult radar. And that isn't whole life, and that isn't nurturing. And even though we make mistakes as parents, we can clean it up. We know what we did wrong, if we raised our voice or if whatever happened. there's so much that happens when your kids are in an institution for 8 hours like that.
That's so true.
It's so random, like the random stuff that happens just, what I always say when people are concerned about the socialization, you should be really thrilled if your kids don't learn to be socialized in public institutions.
Right.
Because
nowadays with the gun issues,
and very terrifying. And when my daughter first got into 7th grade and she was getting bullied on Instagram, I didn't know about it. She was trying to be brave. We were very close. We're very close now. She tells me everything. That's how I heard about this story. But she was being bullied on Instagram and I didn't know it. And thank God she did go to a loving teacher, one of her middle school teachers who we still know till this day. And he brought the bullier into the room and it was a male and he confronted the person. And I never knew this happened, but so great of my daughter to feel so comfortable with older people that she can go and reach out and connect. And she got help, even though for some reason at that point she was private from her mommy and daddy. So it's a lot going on in those schools. And at any point, if you need a break from it, we just want you to know you have possibilities.
Yeah. And starting off for the young parents or the parents with young children, those early ages, it's not such a big risk. I mean, you kind of feel like it is the way it's all set up, like, kindergarten, and we're trying to get our kids into preschool even when they're 2 and all that. But it's just so low risk when they're young. And I just kept going into it saying, okay, we'll take it 1 year at a time, 1 year at a time. People would say, how long are you going to do it for? And I said, I don't know, 1 year at a time. And that's exactly what we did. And we ended up doing it for 6 years. So here's Matthew.
Hello.
This is Matthew.
Baby. Speaking of one of our homeschoolers.
Oh, well, I can't hear you, but
that's right.
Have a good show, everybody.
You can't hear. Well, they can hear you, though, but you can't hear Tam. Here, I'll do this.
Oh, headphone. Thank you.
Matthew, I have a little purple in my hair. Can you see it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do. It looks good. It's changing up the style
Lisa,
a little
what
bit.
you were just saying about what was going on at schools. Also the pressure, meaning that, we had this incredible 2nd grade reading program at the last school that I worked at. And if those kids weren't reading at that level, like, the parents were freaking out. I'm talking about like such pressure on their kids. Who knows what it was like at home when those kids were doing their homework. But in Sweden, they don't even learn to read till they're in 2nd grade.
Right.
So these parents would come into my office like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I would kind of laugh at them, and I'd be like, technically I'm the administrator of the school, but like, oh my gosh, I taught my kids to read in an hour, basically. I mean, it takes 100 hours to teach your children to read and write. They don't need to be in school all day with all this pressure and these grades. And some schools still have grades at these ages,
I mean, sorry, I'm just going to chime in here, but regardless of what their supposed quote unquote reading level is, almost all children are able to read English and read stuff at a young age like that, right? Because I know, kids books are a thing, and I'm sure by the time I was coming to 2nd grade, I had read multiple books to myself.
Right. So Matthew, we don't really have too much time here. We'll see when they tell us we're done here. But are you thankful for your homeschool experience?
I'm very thankful for having elementary school years of homeschooling, because homeschooling was just really flexible and a really experiential education. So it was nice to be able to just we're from the Bay, so I get to spend a lot of time at different places in the Bay while also learning around different environments and kids of different ages around a bunch of subjects that mostly I had some kind of impact on. I had some kind of influence on what we got to learn. So I thought it was really great.
I think
plus I got to spend time with Mom.
Absolutely. And I feel like our relationship is definitely informed by that. One of the things you
guys used to do a lot of cooking.
Yes, of course we did. We did lots of, in fact, we even had a lunch club, which would meet at our house, and it was just terrific. Matthew, tell them about how lunch club worked.
Lunch club was so good. I definitely, I've actually learned that many kids my age, or some kids my age anyways, who are 18 still don't know how to cook at all, or don't even know how to cut vegetables. And cooking club was great. We would like vote on what meal we were going to make, pick out an appetizer, a main, like a soup maybe. And then we would just all get together one day with all the ingredients and just go in and cook a meal.
And then we would all sit together at the table and enjoy it.
And just like compliment each other's like cooking jobs. And we all like, really enjoy it. You always enjoy the meal more when you cook it yourself. And it's like when we had all of our friends, all of our homeschooling buddies to like cook it together, it was all great.
And it, it involved a lot of things. Like they would have to look for recipes that they wanted to submit. And then there would be this democratic voting, like he said, on selecting the menu. And then there'd be revision, like maybe 2 of the recipes that were selected don't quite work together, or they both require oven space that we don't have. And so there'd be adjustments, and then they would budget. And if they were over budget, they would have to either cut down on the amount of an expensive product or replace it with something else. So there was.
I also remember that I was really jealous because when my kids went back to school, Leland had swimming at night, and Lexi had something at night, homework, and we lost our dinner time. And I remember just missing that so much. And I remember we'd come down to visit, and you guys always had your beautiful dinner time.
We did.
Pretty much, yeah. We've almost always been very consistent with that, especially 6 o'clock, regimented dinner time.
Yeah, I think we're in a small category of American families on that front, really. And it is, thank you for reminding us about that, because that's a very important, as a nutritionist, I know how important family mealtime is for so many aspects of nurturing a child. So, and the other thing too is that going back into school, I think one thing too is that the kids go back in, if they are homeschooled and then they re-enter, whether it's private or public school, they're entering with some interest, like they want to prove themselves. They want to, it's new to them. They're not burnt out. I think so often some of these kids are just so burnt out on the schooling process, like they don't ever get to catch a break.
It's too long. It goes on too long. If I were the queen of the world, I would start around 2nd grade, end by 10th grade, and do half days. And that's just enough school. That's just enough school to get a little bit of whatever they're offering, It's not for the workforce. It's we'd have to find childcare. We'd have to fund that. But everybody's burnt out. When Leland went into 6th grade, he didn't want to go to school every day. And so he missed a few days, and I got a truant letter saying if he's not in school, he's going to flunk a grade. And I called the vice principal, and he says it's up to the teachers. Well, the teachers all came back, and he had all A's, because I said to the vice principal, you cannot take these A's away from him. He's so excited. It's the first grades he's ever had in his life. And the teachers all said he's their best student. He contributes. He's helpful. He shares. I guess students don't share that have grown up in public schools. They put up some pencils on the table and everyone reaches for them like they've been starving for pencils for 14 days, So they were like Leland's contributor. And that.
Oh, we lost Cam. What I'll say, because we just have a couple minutes, is as this air shows, it's Matthew's birthday, May 2nd, Matthew, 19 years old. Happy birthday, son.
Happy birthday to me.
Woo!
Let's go.
And I want to express my deep gratitude to Tamara, again, for all her wisdom around homeschooling. I encourage any of you who are even thinking in the slightest about venturing off on this wonderful journey to contact her and find out more, contact me and find out more. Obviously, our passion is great around the subject, and it produces wonderful results. So as always, blessings as you go. My name is Lisa Tremont Ota. I'm your host, and this has been Sacred Exploration.
Thank you so much for tuning in today for Sacred Exploration with Lisa Tremont Ota. Be sure to listen to our program again next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Pacific Time, or anytime on demand on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Enjoy your week.